20 miles. That is the distance separating the coast of Yemen from the shores of Djibouti at the narrowest point of the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. 20 miles of open water through which roughly 12% of all goods traded on Earth must pass. Every iPhone shipped from Asia to Europe, every barrel of Saudi crude heading to Rotterdam, every container of American grain bound for the Mediterranean, all of it squeezes through this single corridor between the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden before it can reach the Suez Canal and continue north. The name translates from Arabic as Gate of Tears. Sailors gave it that name centuries ago, and the reasons were practical. The winds are unpredictable. The currents are strong. A small island called Perim sits in the middle of the strait and splits the passage into two channels. The western one, about 16 miles wide, the eastern barely 2 miles across. Ancient mariners knew that losing a ship here meant losing everything. The geography has not changed. What has changed is the scale of what now depends on this stretch of water surviving open. In the years before the crisis, more than 20,000 vessels transited the strait annually. Daily traffic averaged somewhere between 40 and 50 ships. The corridor carried close to 1.6 billion tons of cargo per year. On the energy side, roughly 8.6 million barrels of oil and refined petroleum products moved through every single day in 2023. For the United States, Europe, and most of East Asia, the math is simple. Close Bab-el-Mandeb, and you do not just slow trade, you force the entire global shipping system onto an alternative route around the southern tip of Africa. This detour adds 10 to 14 days to every voyage between Asia and Europe. There is no pipeline that replaces it. There is no other canal. The Suez Canal handles roughly 13% of world trade, and Bab-el-Mandeb is the only southern gate to the Suez Canal. Block the strait, and the canal becomes irrelevant. The two choke points are one system. Whoever controls the 20 miles between Yemen and Djibouti holds a lever over the logistics of the entire planet. That is exactly what a militia operating out of the mountains of northwestern Yemen decided to test in the fall of 2023. And the world discovered that the Gate of Tears had earned its name once again. In the early 1990s, a Zaydi cleric named Hussein al-Houthi founded a youth movement in the mountains of Saada, a remote governorate in northwestern Yemen near the Saudi border. The organization called itself the Believing Youth. It ran study circles, summer camps, and religious schools. Its stated purpose was a revival of Zaydi Islam, a minority Shia tradition that had governed northern Yemen for centuries, before a Republican revolution swept it away in 1962. Nobody in Washington or Riyadh paid much attention. A religious study group in one of the poorest corners of one of the poorest countries on Earth did not look like a threat to global shipping. Hussein al-Houthi was killed by Yemeni government forces in September 2004, after he refused an order for his arrest and the movement turned openly confrontational. His death did not end the organization. It gave it a martyr. Leadership passed to his family and followers, and the movement that bore his name spent the next decade fighting 6 separate wars against the Yemeni state. They survived each one by retreating deeper into the mountains of Saada, rebuilding, rearming, and emerging stronger. The turning point came in September 2014. Exploiting the chaos of the Arab Spring aftermath and an alliance of convenience with military units loyal to former President Ali Abdullah Saleh, the Houthis swept south from Saada and seized the capital Sana'a in a matter of weeks. President Abdrabbu Mansur Hadi fled. By January 2015, the Houthis had taken the presidential palace. A militia that started as a study group now controlled the nation's capital and its military arsenals. In March 2015, Saudi Arabia assembled a coalition of Gulf states and launched an air campaign to reverse the takeover. The war that followed killed hundreds of thousands of people, triggered one of the worst humanitarian disasters of the 21st century, and failed to dislodge the Houthis from the territory they held. A decade of bombing did not break them. It trained them. Every airstrike taught them something about surviving under sustained military pressure. Every year of sanctions and blockade taught them how to move weapons without being detected. The movement that once organized summer camps in Sada had become, by 2023, a force with ballistic missiles, long-range drones, and a clear strategic ambition: control of the strait their fighters could see from the Yemeni coast. The question every naval commander in the Red Sea eventually had to answer was a simple one. How does a militia in one of the poorest countries on Earth acquire weapons capable of threatening a $300 million warship? The answer has been built over 20 years, one smuggled shipment at a time. The Houthi arsenal that emerged by 2023 was not the arsenal of a guerrilla force. It was the arsenal of a mid-tier regional military. Ballistic missiles with ranges exceeding 1,000 kilometers. Land attack cruise missiles capable of flying 2,000 kilometers at low altitude, hugging terrain to avoid radar detection. One-way attack drones, the Samad series, with ranges between 1,200 and 2,000 kilometers and enough explosive payload to tear open a cargo hold. Anti-ship cruise missiles designed specifically to find and kill vessels at sea. By most counts, the Houthis possessed at least 10 distinct missile types, and the names on most of them were Iranian, not Yemeni. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps built the pipeline. The method was deliberate and layered. Weapons were rarely shipped complete. Instead, components traveled separately: propulsion systems on one dhow, guidance packages on another, warhead assemblies in a third shipment. Wooden fishing vessels called dhows carried the cargo across the Arabian Sea, often transferring loads at sea from larger motherships to smaller coastal craft that could slip into Houthi-controlled ports at Hodeidah and Salif without attracting attention. Between 2015 and 2024, the United States Navy intercepted at least 18 such shipments. Analysts assess that many more got through. In January 2024, U.S. Navy SEALs boarded a dhow off Somalia and recovered Iranian-made components for anti-ship cruise missiles, medium-range ballistic missiles, and unmanned sea drones in a single haul. A seizure in July of that year, the largest ever recorded, produced 750 tons of conventional weapons, advanced drone parts, missile warheads, and radar systems aboard a single vessel. The scale of what was intercepted implied a far larger volume of what was not. Critically, analysis of seized components showed that only about 5% of parts were manufactured in Iran. The remaining 95% were sourced from 16 different countries: commercial electronics, guidance chips, fuel components, all routed through middlemen and front companies. The Houthis did not just receive Iranian weapons. They received a globally sourced weapons industry, assembled in Yemen, pointed at the world's busiest maritime choke point. On the 19th of November 2023, a Houthi helicopter descended onto the deck of the Galaxy Leader, a vehicle carrier crossing the Red Sea. Armed fighters rappelled down ropes, overpowered the crew, and took the ship to a Yemeni port. 25 crew members from the Philippines, Ukraine, Mexico, Bulgaria, Romania, and other nations spent more than a year in captivity before being released. The Houthis filmed the seizure, posted the footage, and announced that no ship with Israeli connections would be permitted to pass through the Red Sea. What looked like a bold one-off action was the opening move of a sustained military campaign. Within weeks, the attacks broadened. The Houthis stopped pretending to limit targets to Israeli-affiliated vessels and began firing at ships from dozens of nations. Drones and anti-ship missiles launched from Yemeni coastal positions and from inland launch sites flew toward vessels in the southern Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and the waters around Bab-el-Mandeb. By February 2024, 40 ships had been struck. The major carriers read the math and made their decisions quickly. Maersk, the world's second-largest container shipping company, suspended all Red Sea transits in early January 2024. Hapag-Lloyd, MSC, CMA CGM, and Evergreen followed within days. Within 2 months of the Galaxy Leader seizure, the corridor that carried 12% of world trade was effectively closed to the companies that carried most of that trade. The ships that stayed paid the price. On February 18th, 2 Houthi missiles hit the Rubimar, a bulk carrier loaded with fertilizer. The crew evacuated. The ship sank on March 2nd, spilling its cargo into the Red Sea, and, investigators later concluded, damaging 3 undersea telecommunications cables on the way down. On June 12th, a Houthi explosive drone boat struck the Tudor, a Greek-owned bulk carrier. 1 Filipino crew member was killed. The Tudor sank a week later, the second vessel lost in the campaign. By October 2024, the Houthis had conducted more than 190 attacks on commercial vessels representing more than 60 nations. Suez Canal transits collapsed from roughly 2,060 per month in November 2023 to fewer than 900 by October 2024. In the history of modern maritime warfare, no non-state actor had ever sustained a naval interdiction campaign of this scale, this duration, or this geographic reach. The militia from Ceuta had blockaded a choke point that navies of major powers had spent decades assuming they controlled. The damage did not arrive all at once. It accumulated the way pressure does, steadily, invisibly, until the numbers became impossible to ignore. The first thing shipping companies felt was cost. In November 2023, sending a standard 40-foot container from Shanghai to Genoa cost roughly $1,400. By late January 2024, the same shipment cost $6,300. Some carriers added diversion surcharges of $2,000 per container on top of that. The reroute around the Cape of Good Hope added approximately 4,000 miles to each voyage and between 10 and 14 extra days of sailing time. One additional trip around the southern tip of Africa cost a ship operator roughly $1 million in extra fuel and crew expenses. Multiply that by the thousands of vessels that diverted over the course of the year, and the aggregate cost runs into tens of billions of dollars. The Suez Canal felt it as a direct revenue collapse. In 2023, the canal generated a record $10.25 billion for Egypt. In 2024, with ship traffic cut roughly in half, that figure fell to $3.99 billion, a loss of more than $6 billion in a single year. This loss came from a waterway Egypt had counted on as a cornerstone of its national finances. For global consumers, the math translated into price pressure that central banks had spent 2 years trying to eliminate. J.P. Morgan estimated the disruption could add 0.7 percentage points to global core goods inflation in the first half of 2024. The OECD warned of 0.4 percentage points added to consumer price inflation. Industries built on just-in-time supply, chains, automotive factories in Europe, electronics assemblers across Asia, faced component shortages and production pauses. Parts from distant suppliers arrived late or not at all, causing delays. A 2-week delay in a single shipment of microchips or battery cells does not stay contained to the factory floor. It ripples forward into delivery schedules, dealer inventories, and the sticker price a buyer sees months later. The 70% drop in Red Sea shipping traffic between December 2023 and April 2024 did not just reroute cargo. It removed capacity from the global market at a moment when that capacity was already priced tight. Every extra ship day spent sailing around Africa was a ship day not available somewhere else. The system absorbed the shock, but not without cost, and the bill was paid not in Sana'a or Tehran, but at ports, warehouses, assembly lines, and checkout counters across the world. The United States did not stand still while the attacks unfolded. In December 2023, Washington assembled Operation Prosperity Guardian, a multinational naval coalition tasked with protecting merchant vessels in the Red Sea. American and British warships began intercepting Houthi drones and missiles. In January 2024, the U.S. and Britain launched airstrikes against Houthi positions in Yemen, hitting over 60 targets across 16 locations. The strikes continued for months. In March 2025, a major escalation of that air campaign began under the name Operation Rough Rider. And throughout all of it, the Houthis kept firing. The fundamental problem was geography and incentive structure. Destroying a drone launcher costs a fraction of what it costs to intercept a drone in flight. A single U.S. Standard missile, too used for interception, is worth roughly $2 million. The Houthis could absorb attrition because their weapons were cheap, their supply chain remained active, and their political objective gave them no reason to stop. A militia does not need to win militarily. It only needs to make the cost of transit high enough that the calculation for shipping companies stays broken. In May 2025, the Trump administration announced a ceasefire between the United States and the Houthis, brokered by Oman. The Houthis agreed to stop targeting American vessels. The ceasefire said nothing about ships from other nations, and the Houthis stated explicitly that Israel was not included in the deal. In October 2025, a Gaza ceasefire finally brought Houthi attacks on commercial shipping to a broader halt. The group made its position clear in writing. If the Gaza ceasefire collapses, the Red Sea campaign resumes. That conditionality is the core of what makes this crisis different from any maritime disruption that came before it. Pirates off Somalia in the 2010s demanded ransom and operated without a state backer. The Houthi campaign is political, ideological, and externally supplied. It can be switched off or on based on decisions made not in Sana'a, but in negotiations over a conflict thousands of miles away. The strait did not close because of a storm or a grounded container ship. It closed because a militia decided it should, and the most powerful navy in the world could not make it reopen on its own terms. 20 miles of water between Yemen and Djibouti, 12% of world trade, a militia with Iranian missiles, and a political cause that outlasts any air campaign. The Gate of Tears has been earning its name for centuries. It has rarely made the point so clearly,